what the thunder brings. So for context, my dad is an alcoholic and has been my entire life. We have not had a meaningful relationship since before I went through puberty, and my parents have been separated since I was 14. I am 33 now and married, and at the time this happened, I was 32 and engaged. And my fiancé and I were staying with my mom for about a year to help her after she had back surgery and preparing for an additional hip replacement. In March of 2024, my mom had a heart attack brought on by COPD-induced stress, and my dad was with her that day. I told him to tell her doctor that she had been having pain in her back, in the area her bra band sits, which is a common sign of heart attacks in women. Neither of them listened to me, and 8 hours later, my mom was on a vent in the ER and a whole cocktail of drugs to keep her heart rate down. After that, my dad just decided he was going to stay with my mom in her house to help take care of her. I clearly remembered how amazing it had felt to explore the fields, barns, and secret paths around the house. Upon my return, I was confronted with a first impression that differed much from what I remembered. The land was barren and dry, no corn obstructing the view. The windows of many of the farms I passed by nailed shut. It hadn't rained in a long time. My mother had already told me that my grandparents wouldn't have a chance in harvesting anything that year, even if they would magically regain all their youthful strength. The weather was putting the residents of the area to the test. To me, it didn't matter much. My grandparents had saved up quite a bit during their lifetime of work. They weren't harvesting anymore anyway. Now they simply wanted to live in peace in the beloved surroundings of their home for the rest of their days. No matter how much the few relatives we had urged them, no one could convince them to move out of the remote house. My grandma has been a bit weak and fragile ever since I can remember, but my grandfather's recent stroke had changed their lives a lot. They needed someone to fix things around the house, buy groceries, make dinner, and so on. So that was my job now. While their bodies were slowly giving in to their age, mentally, my grandparents had stayed surprisingly fit. This was a very pleasant surprise. I didn't feel much like a caretaker, and more like a friend staying over. While we had quite some fun playing board games and sharing stories in the late hours of the evening, I especially enjoyed the quiet beers I sometimes had with my grandfather after I rolled his wheelchair out onto the porch at sundown. The evening I want to tell you about had started exactly like that. The day had been especially hot and muggy. I watched the drops of condensation roll down the can in my hands. It felt just right. I actually thought that I hadn't been this satisfied with my life in a long time. The sound of liquid dripping onto the wooden floor ripped me out of my thoughts. My grandfather was often a bit shaky, but that day it was more intense. Some of his beer had slopped out of the can. The moment I noticed, the stains on the wooden floor had already begun to dry. He looked at me, his lips pressed together tightly. Something felt awe. I took another sip and then decided to ask. My inquiry as to what was wrong was answered only after a long pause. "It smells like rain," he said. "I think we shouldn't stay outside much longer." I hadn't seen a drop of rain in the 2 weeks of my stay so far. I expected the thunder that I heard soon after. The air had been charged with that certain kind of electricity for a few hours by then. If you have ever experienced a thunderstorm in summer, I think you know what I mean. I had brushed my teeth and was now standing at my bedroom window. A cool breeze was moving my curtains. Just as I was turning towards my bed, I felt as if I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Lightning, but not simply that. The lightning was carving out the shape of something in the sky. It was just a split second, but I was sure. Now wide awake, I pulled a chair next to the window, sat down, and waited. I tried not to blink. The next lightning came. I could make out a gigantic shape. It moved. It moved within the dark clouds that drew thicker by the minute. Every lightning was like a snapshot of this silhouette. I will try to describe it as best as I can. Even though the incident happened 30 years ago, these images will forever be burned into the trenches of my brain. It must have been 100 meters big, give or take. It sounds crazy, I know, but the thing was there, up in the sky. The lightning became more frequent. Its limbs moved in different directions. There were many. I first thought they were arms, but it could also have been something tentacle-like. The rain had started to come down by then. Some of its limbs were reaching downwards, breaking through the barrier of clouds. It looked like they were searching for something. I was startled. Previously, trying my best not to blink, I was now more than afraid to do so. Slowly, I realized that the clouds were moving towards the house. It felt like minutes before I finally managed to move. I grabbed the curtains and drew them shut. While I did so, I caught one last glimpse of it, or better, of one of its limbs. It quickly moved over the field, the road, searching. It got caught on a telephone pole. In one quick motion, it wrapped around the pole and ripped it out of the ground. That was it. I pressed my eyes shut and practically fell to the floor. Hunched up, in fetal position, I lay there for a long time. An hour passed, maybe even 2, before I felt like the growling of the thunder became less frequent. The sound of the heavy rain had turned softer. I managed to crawl into my bed, hid under the covers, and eventually fell asleep. The next day had started quietly. There was nothing to be heard outside. My body hurt as I got up because of the tension my muscles had been in all night. I think I peeked out between the curtains. Fields, still a bit wet. In some spaces, the ground looked as if something big had plowed over it. About 50 meters away, the telephone pole lay on the ground. As I entered the kitchen, my grandfather greeted me. What a storm. I think there are some fences that need to be repaired. Can you do that later? I stayed for the rest of the summer. It was different now. We talked less. In September, I decided to go back to the city, even though my grandparents were sad to see me go. In 1998, they both died. My mother sold the house. I can't let go of the memories of this night. As I said, it feels like it is burned into my brain. I still wonder what I saw. Maybe there is a rational explanation. A gas leak causing hallucinations or something? I really don't know. Thank you so much for reading. Maybe this story reaches someone who has experienced something similar. Have a good night.